This is TWIS, This Week in Science, episode number 978, recorded on Wednesday, July 17th, 2024. How are animals better than people? Hi, I'm Dr. Kiki, and tonight on the show, we will be filling your head with aggressive boys, baddie buying, and poo counting, among the other favorite things. But first, thanks to our amazing Patreon sponsors for their generous support of TWIS. You can become a part of the Patreon community at patreon.com/thisweekinscience.
Disclaimer. Since we last met, there has been a shooting. I'm sure you heard about it, but how did you hear about it? As an assassination attempt? The result of political rhetoric? A sign that things have gone too far? Maybe all these things, but only maybe. It seems extreme, a threat to democracy, a uniquely shocking moment in history. But is it really? What sets this particular shooting apart from those of the past is that it seems so familiar. A shooter, usually young, almost always male, typically a loner, likely a right-wing upbringing, frequently armed with an AR-15 assault rifle, opens fire on a crowd of shoppers, of worshipers, of protesters, of moviegoers, of concert attendees, of children. At a mall, a church, on a public street, in a theater, a concert venue, or at a school. When these events happen, the historical uniqueness of it is ignored. The calls for gun control dismissed, and after some meaningless lip service of thoughts and prayers, we move on to the next mass shooting. While this recent mass shooting event was cut short by Secret Service snipers, the next one will not be. And so we move on to This Week in Science, coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
And a good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are so glad to have you joining us this week, and we hope that you are here ready for the joy that the curiosity about this world can bring us. Let's dig deep into that common human trait that starts really, really early, very shortly after a child can speak. Why? How? Why? How? Asking questions. Curiosity. It helps us grow. It helps us do all the things. Blair, you have to let us know when the little one begins asking questions.
Oh, I will. He's in a pointing phase right now, which is kind of a nonverbal question. Like, what's that? What's that? What? And so we just walk around and I go, tree, car, dog, dad.
And pretty soon it'll be that, because it's hard to say what's that. So the question is that. Oh, children of the universe, children of science, let us dig into all the good things that we have for the evening. I have stories about sheltering in space, the species race, microplastics days, mushroom glaze, and a sense of self and place. What do you have for us, Justin?
I've got aggressive boys, socioeconomic cell donors, and cooling power.
It's so cool. But not really. Blair, what's in the animal corner?
I tried to scramble and see if I could get it to rhyme, but I didn't get the memo, and it's not going to happen.
You didn't get it in time.
No. I have buying bats, I have counting poo, and I also have seagull diets.
That
I feel like it
include,
could just be anything that's available.
right? Seagull diets. What do you
Yeah.
have? Once upon a time, it was my big toe.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Sure.
that was
Yes.
very,
Well,
very
this is about
hungry
this is
seagull.
less about eating like a seagull and what seagulls would like to eat. So, is your toe on the menu? We'll find out.
News at 11. Oh my goodness, everyone. We do love it when you come and join the show. So thank you so much for being here. I am going to remind you once again that if you're not yet subscribed, watching live, it's Wednesdays, 8 p.m. ish at Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Look for This Week in Science, and you should be able to find us on those interwebs. You can also look for that on the search browsers all over the place. This Week in Science. We are in podcast form all over, and our website is TWIS.org. We do love your subscriptions, and if you share, that helps us find other people out there. I have a sense that tonight is going to be a rhyming night. Anyway, we ready for the science?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Let's dive in. First off, the docket. We talked, and we have talked a little bit off and on over the last few weeks about the astronauts on the International Space Station that are, I will say, stuck there so far. Because of the leaks on the Starliner capsule. Helium has been leaking, and helium is not easy to come by. So, and if there are leaks, there's also going to be an issue with the working of these parts, which are meant for the motion of the Starliner, so that when they come back into the atmosphere at a very particular angle and speed, they don't twist and end up crashing. Anyway.
What could go wrong if you just took the wrong angle at reentry, Kiki?
Well, if you took the wrong angle, you might get a lot hotter and just burn up.
Oh.
And
Okay.
you turn into lots of little pieces, and that would not be good. And we don't want to
stranded
lose
in
the
space-
astronauts. Yeah.
Stranded in space might be preferable to unintended
Tiny bits? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the news that's the
Dismantling.
update this week is that the Starliner astronauts, the two of them that have been on the International Space Station and are doing very well as impromptu members of the space station crew, fitting right in to get things done. They are possibly going to be stuck on the space station until August, when the next provisioning happens. So the next time that there's a crew turnover and the stuff goes, they're taking food and water and all sorts of supplies to the space station, maybe that's when they will get to hop a ride and come back. So the question is, now at this point, whether or not they will let the Starliner either come back to Earth on its own or with pilots. We don't know.
I have a feeling that it's just going to end up in the front yard of the International Space Station, up on blocks.
How long can they keep this craft stuck there, right?
Sitting there collecting dust. They might throw a tarp over it.
Yeah, maybe they'll strip it for parts in space.
I mean, who knows? The economy is a rough place. We'll see.
I don't know. I don't know what the space HOAs look like.
Yeah,
they could get some fines and tickets,
legal fees. Yeah. I'm sorry, you were not allowed to park a space capsule on the front lawn. I'm sorry. But in the future, if this were to happen, maybe they wouldn't have to shelter in space on the ISS. Maybe, if they made it as far as the moon, they could shelter in space in a cave on the moon. Researchers for years have been looking at data from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and other missions with radar data suggesting there are lots and lots of caves on the surface of not Mars. Geez, my knees, my brain is broken tonight. It's summertime. Of the moon and the Luna. Anyway, 250 miles from the landing place of the Apollo mission, where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed. There is a cave that researchers have been looking at for quite a while. The data was first collected in 2010, so they've had it for over 10 years, but it takes a while to get through everything. We've talked about it off and on. I think a couple of years ago was the last time that we discussed it, but now the data that's been published suggests that it's an accessible cave conduit that is below the Mare Tranquillitatis pit, and that this Mare Tranquillitatis pit, it is an elliptical skylight with vertical or overhanging walls and a sloping pit floor that it seems to extend further underground. There is a mini RF radio frequency instrument on board, and that the radar reflections that originated from this pit suggest a subsurface cave. It's at least tens of meters long, if not further. They can't get much more than that. But there have been other caves they've noticed. Some of them seem to be collapsed lunar lava tubes, and this also could have been formed as a result of lava tubes on the moon during the moon's very molten reconstruction period. So anyway, it suggests overall that with a cave conduit system, this would allow a place for future lunar inhabitants to live, to be able to be protected from radiation, from solar winds, from all sorts of stuff, and also to have a fairly temperature-controlled environment, which I think is pretty cool. You go to the moon, you go live in a cave. Why live in a cave on Earth?
And you might even discover that there were lunar nalettes living there at some point.
Who knows? I mean, why not? I mean, maybe there's evidence of hominin. No, there's not going to be. I mean, if anything, it's going to be tardigrades.
So this is, depending, of course, on how stable the cave is. But maybe if it's, you would think that something that was etched out of lava tubes might be somewhat stable. This is a huge advantage when we were talking about lunar base. Mm-hmm. There's all these plans of, okay, so you want to build a lunar base. The problem is it's so expensive to send anything into space, let alone all the way, to the moon. Construction materials is just ridiculous. The expensive thing. So the plans right now have been to send machines up to the moon that can make bricks out of moon rock and dust, and then maybe use those as the materials to build the lunar base or habitats going forward. But if there's already a cave system that you can then construct around, you have everything that you have, of course, just already stated, the radiation sort of buffering, the temperature buffering, a lot of those things that we would hope our structures on the moon would allow for. Infrastructure could kind of already be there in a cave system. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why our hominin ancestors, we keep finding so much evidence in caves. Well, firstly, it just lasts longer in a cave. That's really the big part of it. But caves are really convenient for getting out of bad weather and having
so many animals
environment, all that sort of thing.
Them. Yeah. So the cave systems, even though they might be less stable than something we build completely by ourselves, we could, with less trouble, construct some kind of support system that would, support any area in which humans were living. So it does reduce the cost. It potentially gives us a starting point as opposed to starting from scratch. And we all know that I shouldn't say we all know, but it is known that the regolith is very dusty, is electrostatic. And if there's any way to get away from that and create a space that is less disrupted by the dust on the moon, that could probably be really good as well.
Oh, the picture you shared there for the audience, it does look like a sinkhole. Like
it's like a sinkhole that has like
100-meter deep
it's
sinkhole.
like somebody took a tree out of the moon.
But it's 100 meters deep. It's also like, now that I've seen it, I'm like, I don't think I would want to build my anything on what looks like a sinkhole. I feel like that's
be a
the
great
area
elevator
to avoid.
system. Yeah.
Alice in Wonderland. Down, down,
Down, down. All right, Justin, what do you want to talk? All right, who's next? Yes, Justin, you want to talk about boys? What are boys doing?
Let's talk about the boys. Or actually, let's talk about men. Actually, what's the difference? So,
I mean, they're both like in a singing group from the 80s, 90s.
well, and those ones actually transition from boys
90s.
to men.
Two men.
Story
But that doesn't happen until they're at least 25, as we learned about their brains, right?
And it doesn't always happen. So, according to this study, certain men become aggressive when they perceive their manhood as being threatened. What do you mean I have an elegant demeanor? No, I don't. And how dare you, sir, you cat, you scoundrel, you rogue, why you are the very embodiment of anti-bourgeois rhetorical disparagement. I am anything
What just
but
happened?
Oh, you said arrogant? Yeah, I can roll with that. I can know. That's fine.
Oh my goodness.
So it's how I picture aggressive men talking when they feel their manhood is in question. Basically overcompensating for something that they don't fully understand.
That's you've watched the Ryan Reynolds Will Ferrell Christmas special, haven't you? I say good day.
No. But I get the trope that they're playing with if that's the case. But in reality, these sort of aggressive men who feel that their manhood is being threatened usually act like adolescent boys, only like much more violent in many instances. So when does this behavior emerge during development and why? So it was the focus of a new study by a team of psychology researchers showing that adolescent boys can also respond aggressively when they believe their masculinity is under threat, especially boys who grow up in environments with rigid, stereotypical gender norms. The findings, reported in the journal Developmental Science, underscore the effect of social pressure that many boys face to be stereotypically masculine, which can also be, in this day and age where we have all of these sort of toxic, fake alpha males in social media, that can even increase that, no doubt. So this is a quote from Adam Stenland, postdoctoral researcher at New York University and the paper's lead author. We know that not all men respond aggressively to manhood threats. In past work, we have found that it is primarily men whose stereotypical masculinity is socially pressured who are the most aggressive under such threats. Now we have evidence that certain adolescent boys respond similarly, pointing to the foundations of these potentially harmful processes. Beyond just aggression, manhood threats are associated with a wide variety of negative antisocial behaviors, such as sexism, homophobia, political bigotry, and even anti-environmentalism. Which also isn't shown here, but I'm sure that's also probably increased risky behaviors, increased alcohol use, increased, like, all of these sort of things are probably also associated with this. Our findings call for actively challenging the restrictive norms and social pressure that boys face to be stereotypically masculine, particularly during puberty and coming from their parents and peers. So it was kind of an interesting way that they sussed this out. They had more than 200 adolescent boys in the U.S., and also interviews with their parents. And they gave them, like a series of questions. Like the questions were things like, which of these tools is a Phillips head screwdriver? your little shop knowledge, if your dad has passed or mother has passed this information on, you're like, that's the Phillips head screwdriver, and then you scratch yourself for no reason. And then they would ask questions like, which of these flowers is a poppy flower or poppy fairy or something? So, and to be fair, like a lot of the questions were like anybody could know the answer to, right? Like anybody.
But you don't, Justin, because you're a man, so you don't know which one a poppy is.
No. But to be fair, this was the point, though, is that they could be answered by anyone. They weren't gender. There's no gender.
You don't want to admit that. That impacts your masculinity.
Only real men know poppies.
I know what a poppy fairy is. Back off.
What is a poppy fairy? I don't know what a poppy fairy is.
Flower fairy.
It's a flower fairy.
It's a fairy that pollinates poppies.
Is it a bee?
Okay, I guess not everybody knows. But this is like who doesn't know what a poppy fairy is? Oh my god. Anyway, so
no clue.
Googling
but the point was, regardless of gender, you can identify or suss out both of the questions. But this was also sort of the point, because at random, they were told that their scores at the end of this survey were either typical of their gender or atypical. So these poor boys were told that their answers were more girl-like in this first round of question.
All right, so they just basically were like, well, you answered like a girl.
Yeah, your questions were more usually girls answer like that.
They could have done that with throwing baseballs and been like, well, you throw like a girl.
Right. It could have been anything. But then they had went on to round 2 of the questions, and they had sort of opportunities to become more masculine in their answers, like finish the spelling this word, G-U and like M, gum, or it could be gun.
N.
Right. So then the second round of questions was more like allowing them to move the needle back where they needed to. And so basically they took into account a lot of other factors. They found that the boys who felt that their masculinity had been, there we go. There's the poppy fairies in those pictures. Yeah.
Never heard of them.
Never
heard of a poppy fairy before?
I really grew up enjoying.
Where did you grow up under? Oh, you're a big city girl. To be fair, the poppy fairies don't hang out in the big city very often.
Oh, okay.
I grew up out in the country. I didn't know poppy fairies.
So poppy fairies were on this quiz?
Where is
they had but this is an example. They got all sorts of stuff.
Okay.
That's just one I pulled out of it. Okay. So
okay, so basically what you're saying is that when you threaten somebody's masculinity, they get aggressive.
Mm-hmm. But when they're in adolescence and they're during that formative period of kind of identity crystallization, who are they? Who are
the
they?
aggression was heightened amongst boys whose motivation was to be gender typical. Also, this was also an important factor. Right. So if they didn't feel like they had to be gender typical, like if they didn't feel like the social peer pressure, it was like, then they didn't. They just continued to answer questions like a normal person would. But the boys most likely to reveal this pressured motivation were those whose parents strongly endorsed the stereotypical belief about men's status and power, that men should have more power than others, that so
because to be less manly is to be weak in that case. That's what you're being taught, or you're being taught that to be less manly you also get less privilege is
right. And it's this sort of
subtext that's happening there,
this fragile masculinity. Like if you call a real man, I'm not talking about these pretend men. I'm talking about if you tell a real man that he looks like somebody who likes a poppy fairy, he'll tell you, what's wrong with a poppy fairy? Poppy fairies are awesome. I also like rainbows. Unicorns are cool.
Yeah. Real men
Like,
wearing
there's not going to be
all that
any
good stuff.
challenge.
I think the big question, but I think the big question here
Manhood
though is,
over-
can you follow the kids, adolescents, who are at this period of development and then into their adulthood, and do their responses change, or is this simply because of how they feel internally and how they have been raised externally, and how there's conflicts inherent in the way that they see themselves? Do those persist throughout adulthood? Are they crystallized at that phase, and do they persist? And are those, people who are then going on to attack others for the way that they present? Or is this, how does it end up continuing? And I think
Right.
the developmental aspect of this is important.
So we have, and that's the thing. They were trying. This is something that has been recognized in adult males, and so they sort of backtracked and to see where is this present, and they discovered it is in the adolescent boys, usually going through puberty, usually with a lot of with certain social pressures. Specific social pressures that sort of they think they don't have these boys tracked into manhood yet, but we have this exhibited in adulthood, and then we have sort of starting points where it looks like this behavior is being exhibited. But are they the same boys all the way through? Probably not. There's going to be changes and all that sort of thing. You can a lot of people buck their youthful social pressures as they age, and some don't.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, a lot of it, I would wager, does come down to that parental influence also.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's definitely a whole generation of people having kids right now who subvert expectations with that kind of thing and don't care if their little boy wears a tutu to school, and it kind of changes some of that expectation. So it would be interesting to have this as kind of a longer term study and see if it changes as these other generations start raising children.
Although you could also go through the list of what we were talking about in the earlier, like the young loner males who've done mass shootings. How many of their parents were hippies? How many of their parents were donators to National Public Radio?
Some. We have seen across the board, there have been, this is
good people on both sides. Kiki, are you really going there?
I actually am, because there is consistently, there are ways that people become damaged, and it doesn't matter what side of our American political spectrum you are on. But there are, when guns are available and when there is psychological discord, there is higher prevalence to these actions. So, I'm just going to say higher availability of guns to more people make these things more likely. But that is not what this study was talking about. This study was talking about the development of the fragile male ego, and how to maybe help people have less fragility within themselves, even in the face of this kind of upbringing. Right? Yeah, you're nodding your head. Okay, good. Blair, how many times do I have to poop today?
1 to 2.
What? That's it?
The whole story.
That's about right.
Yeah. So
not 7 to 8.
Is that the whole story?
That's the story.
Essentially, this is my study of the week, but I thought it was very funny. So
I love it.
This was a study done via surveys on generally healthy adults. They categorized self-reported bowel movement frequency into 4 groups: constipation, 1 or 2 bowel movements per week; low normal, between 3 and 6 per week; high normal, between 1 and 3 per day; and diarrhea, which is more than 3 per day. Right. And they looked for associations between bowel movement frequency and factors including demographics, genetics, gut microbiome, blood metabolites, and plasma chemistries. And they showed that age, sex, and BMI, which is garbage, were significantly associated with bowel movement frequency. Specifically, younger people, women, and those with lower BMI had less frequent bowel movements. And
And
that
I'm
generally
gonna just
speaking,
yeah, go ahead.
yes,
I was
the
just gonna jump in and
Goldilocks
say
zone of bowel movements is 1 to 2 times per day.
the Goldilocks zone. But the truth is, like, if you're eating a lot of food, even if you're digesting a lot of it because of digestion, if you're eating a lot of food, you're gonna get rid of a lot of food. If you're a vegetarian eating a lot of food, there still has to be a lot of non-digestible matter that comes out.
Yes.
So
Yes, absolutely.
more food equals more poo. It's
Right.
just
So if you have
it's
a lower
balance.
BMI, that is likely to be associated with less food that you're eating, therefore less bowel movements. When
And
you're younger,
bowel movement is BMI is not bowel movement intention.
no,
It is
no.
body mass.
Body mass index. So it's supposed to be a
Index.
measure of fat. It's not really, it's garbage, but it does measure basically like how much you weigh,
Yeah.
we'll say, related to how tall you are. That's all it is. It's a very silly
Mhm.
number. But regardless,
No
if you have
resolution.
more body mass and you eat more, you will poop more. Similarly, as
Mhm.
people get older, they generally have digestive trouble. That could be because they're on more medications. That could be just because you're getting older and, less regular, more regular, who knows, right? And so it seems like a very silly study. Like, yes, of course, if you poop once or twice a day, that means your guts are happy. Your guts are happy because you're eating well or you're healthy.
Mm.
Duh. If you have other things wrong with you, your poop schedule's probably messed up.
Yeah.
If you're on medication, it messes with your poop.
Mhm.
If you have gut problems, then you're not eating the same because you don't feel good. Like if your gut microbiome is off, you're not digesting like you're supposed to. It's a very silly study, but I think it's very funny that they did this huge survey and asked people how often they poop.
How often do you poop? Well, sometimes a lot, sometimes not very much. Depends. Yeah.
If
That's
it's
really
on
true.
average 1 to 2 times a day, you're doing fine.
Yes. I do think that it is interesting here, though, in their the summary of their research, they've found that there is a compound that is related to kidney function, which you wouldn't normally associate with the defecation, but a compound called indoxyl sulfate, so a sulfur compound, is linked to constipation and is negatively associated with kidney function. So, and also when you don't poo correctly, that you have more toxins in your blood, which
Yep.
if you're constipated, it means that that makes sense. And otherwise, yeah,
you're not eliminating waste. That's gonna not be good for you.
yeah. And I think a lot of people just accept whatever their body is giving them, whereas that kind of discomfort isn't necessarily normal. And maybe you should go to a doctor or drink more water or eat fiber or get more physical activity if you can, because there's a lot of things involved. Physical activity, just moving around side to side, twisty, twisty, do, 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 suddenly gets things moving. Chugga, chugga, chugga. Suddenly there's a train in there. I don't know.
So if I'm pooping once an hour, you're saying
too much.
right?
Yeah, that's diarrhea.
Too much poo, poo, poo. Oh man, now I'm on the poo train. I gotta get off.
When you're walking down the street and there's something in your seat.
Oh, yes,
I
Blair.
bet you can't tell that right now I'm pooping.
No.
I mean, no, you could be. You could be
I would-
broadcasting from the bathroom. We wouldn't know.
We would have no
This is
idea.
the bathroom that I'm broadcasting
Except it would probably be
from.
more
I broadcast
echoous.
from the bathroom every week because it's just more convenient for my
Oh my
constant
goodness.
necessity of pooping.
There's that commercial for IBS where the woman opens her car and the seat in the car is a toilet. I think about that all the time.
I haven't seen that. That's brilliant.
So
Dang.
convenient.
Ugh.
I was also thinking that the group where this study originated, or where it's I don't remember if it's originated or published, but it's the ISB Society for Biology. Anyway, if it were just reversed, it would be the IBS Society. So
Yeah, might as well be.
might as well be. Yeah. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Let's see. I have another cool study about two studies about natural selection. Sometimes nature wants to poop out the bad things. I'm sorry. Gonna get off the poop train now. Two studies this week, one in Science and another in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, both looking at natural selection in different species. Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, PNAS, they looked at genome-wide signatures of short-term temporal selection. They looked at the little tiny crustacean, the sand flea, Daphnia pulex. It has a really short population turnover or reproductive lifetime, and it has a very quick temporal variation. So it responds very quickly in a laboratory model situation to lots of insults to its self. And the populations that are tested very often respond very quickly. So they've been adopted widely as a lab model species. And the researchers were like, hey, what about in the real world? Let's look at the Daphnia and see what happens over time. And they looked at about 1,000 genetic isolates of these little fleas to find that there was a lot of temporal variation in the selection intensity. And in this particular study, they're like, oh, look, there's so much variation that basically it all cancels out over time. So the nucleotides that were varying over time, it was just, there's so much that it all kind of settled around zero. So the over time, it didn't really make a big difference. However, they did find that there was a lot of covariance across different connected or linked sites. So there would be groups of genetic information, genes and other things that were like islands within the entire genome that were kind of linked. And so the question is, how much genetic drift is also canceled out because of the fact that you have positive selection effects that are also pulling along other mutations that are negatively impactful evolutionary wise. And then the other study was looking at barley, because we all love barley. Barley has been around since pretty much the beginning of agriculture, and we've used it for human sustenance for a very long time. And so it's been around, has a lot of genetic variation. We've been modifying it forever. And some researchers started this really cool garden experiment with barley in 1929 in UC Davis. So our hometown.
That's where I know where it is.
Yeah, you know where it is. This experiment's almost 100 years old, and they just published their work. When it initially started, there were 28 diverse barley varieties, and then within 50 generations, basically 30% of the genome became fixed, and about 60% of the progeny were descended from one parental line. So natural selection, they support the idea that natural selection drives evolution with this barley experiment. And in this particular experiment, it was like, oh, look, all of the Mediterranean genes and varietals, it all kind of mixed into, oh, look, UC Davis, California is a very Mediterranean climate. Those all did very well. But then climate change also impacted. So as water decreased during increasing drought seasons, and heat began to increase more regularly, and the fluctuations between weather and temperature were varying more and more, we see particular strains and genes that have led the charge over the last nearly 100 years. And so in their study, they say it's really very fascinating that you can start with a large amount of diversity and yet end up with very minimal diversity after a very short period of time if the conditions for natural selection are right. Yeah. So anyway, evolution. It very much seems to be driven by natural selection, according to these two studies. And they're both interesting because of the way that they have looked at the question of the genes and the genomes and how they change over time, both on different temporal timescales, but generationally, how longer and shorter timescales, depending on the environment and the species themselves and their longevity and their reproductive timing, how that can actually increase or decrease diversity within various species. I don't know. What does it mean for us? Well, it means that possibly we are putting ourselves into a bad position when it comes to food and the way that our food has become less and less diverse over time, and the genomes are potentially going to be less able to react to future environmental conditions. But hey, thank goodness we know about CRISPR.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't this also kind of explain how you can have genes maintain in a population when you feel like they should be gone, right? So like
yes, the Daphnia
kind of
species.
shows
Yes, those studies.
Yeah, the Daphnia study in particular, I read it also earlier. I thought it was so cool. It's like, why in evolution, if there's selective pressure for a trait, why do you end up with these small micro populations with the less desired trait, right? And so like it explains why there needs to be this genetic diversity in order for a species to thrive, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it also does mean something for us because it explains why there's so many types of humans out there still. We're a pretty young species, and sometimes it feels like there's not very far to go mutation wise, but there's a lot of variation out there still, and it's because it's what makes a species healthy.
Yeah. As we move forward into genetic therapies and the way that we're looking at, we can fix this single nucleotide polymorphism and change this one gene. But then the question is, okay, what if you change that one gene? Is it linked to other genes? And what is the network effect? How does it impact other stuff? And especially for therapies that are going to be at the embryonic stage or even, at the germ cell level, I think we really need to consider those larger impacts on what you're carrying along or not. Yeah. Justin, do you have stories?
You had something to say. Energy resource chromosomal powerhousing issue, like where the gene happens to be. Like, is there something else that's operating on that chromosome that's taking up all the spotlight or the energy production or what have you? So then there's also that, which is like this whole other hidden element to this. It's so like, where is the gene? Is that gene so pronounced? Not because it was useful, but because the other genes that are on there aren't really being active, and something's gonna get produced, and this one happens to be. So there's like this whole other interplay that's involved at the base of this too. My second to last story.
You got others? Tell me your others.
This one's more of a question than a comment, really.
Okay.
A research team led by University of Minnesota Medical School has demonstrated that the socioeconomic status of cell donors affects the health outcomes of blood cancer patients who underwent a blood cell transplant or hematopoietic cell transplantation. So the work is published in the Journal Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences. The study examined the health outcomes of 2,005 blood cancer patients treated with hematopoietic cell transplantation across 125 hospitals in the United States. The research team found cancer patients who were transplanted with cells from donors with the most significant socioeconomic disadvantage experienced a 9.7% reduction in overall survival and 6.6% increase in transplant-related mortality at the 3-year mark, compared to those who were transplanted from donors of high socioeconomic status. Well, what was amazing and intriguing, what I thought was amazing and intriguing about this is this held regardless of the cancer patient's socioeconomic status. This is quoting.
So what's happening? What is happening in what's given? Okay, I want to know more. Yeah.
Our findings are quite remarkable. You always need to say that about your research. We have shown that social disadvantage penetrates so deeply that it is actually transplantable to a new host, and its effects persist over time. That was Lucia Turcotte, Associate Professor, University of Minnesota Medical School, and one of the folks involved in the study. The research shows the striking biological impact of social disadvantage and how it can alter health outcomes, even when your cells are planted outside of your life and into someone else's body.
I just would like it stated for the record that Blair is now sitting with her head in her hand. I think you have
this is so bad.
Devastated.
This is so bad for two reasons, if I may.
Please.
There's many reasons. Yes. One, now the rich are going to get the good blood. That's where this is going.
It's cells. Sure. So these are like bone marrow.
Rich blood, poor blood.
Right,
rich bone,
but
poor,
still,
poor bone.
The donor material, right? Across the board, they're going to start going, oh, I want the rich stuff.
I need the pedigree.
I want the, yes,
marrow.
This is bad. But this is also bad because people...
I want to suck out the rich marrow of life.
It's not working. Or it is working exactly as intended. But essentially, the fact that you can tell in people's bone marrow if they are of poor socioeconomic status, that is messed up. That means the system sucks. Beyond the shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
This is not fair. You can tell inside someone's bones that they're poor.
So to be fair, socialism.
It's in your bones, Blair. To be fair, okay.
To be fair, socialism. The research team plans to conduct further research to investigate the underlying biological and physiologic drivers of these findings in order to develop interventions to mitigate the adverse health outcomes introduced by socioeconomic disadvantage. The importance of these findings reach far beyond cancer and bone marrow transplant care. They just demonstrate the profound health effects of social inequality and highlight critical need for public health.
Wait, was this in America?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, all right, just checking. I mean, ultimately, why? Why is this? Is it because these people didn't have access to healthcare from an early age because for some reason that's tied to income in this country? Or is it larger? Is it nutrition and stress? And is it all these other... That's what I'm really curious about is what is the mechanism to make this material inferior? What is
I don't
causing-
think that's, I mean, this is not looking at just the cells. I mean, this is looking at overall survival and
Right.
transplant related mortality. That absolutely could be specifically because of the transplant, but overall survival, you are looking at people who possibly don't have the environment to stay healthy, because, you know, with transplants, there are very often anti-rejection drugs, there are all sorts of medications, there's a consistency of care, a consistency of health level that needs to be maintained. And perhaps it has to do with the environment that the people are in when they go home.
So all of
Not the
that,
cells themselves.
it's a select group that's getting these sorts of transplants. But
Yeah.
they found 2,000 plus of them
Yes.
across 125
Cancer.
different hospitals across the United
Mhm.
States. So you've got widespread differences in the socioeconomics of the patients, differences in the hospitals, differences in the reactions, all those things, right? And then this consistent bar of, if your donor was low socioeconomic, your health outcomes are worse across, regardless of everything else.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, I was trying to come up with some. I was trying to. I was trying to work
right.
it. but-
You're right.
Yeah.
You're 100% right. But that's what was so
That's
sort
what
of
they're saying, yeah.
like intriguing and amazing and like jumps out from this study is like,
Yeah.
when all that stuff is kind of randomized and controlled for, we see that like
for now.
that
But Blair, you're right.
poverty
Why? Mhm.
is impacting cellular like health, cellular health, to the point where even if you took those out and put them in a healthier, or I don't know, cancer patient, maybe not exactly healthier, different body, it's still having a detrimental effect.
This makes me so mad.
Well, I think this is obviously going to come down to a lot of things that's going to be noisy.
But I think
Diet that you can afford when you're low socioeconomic,
That's
the
what I'm
levels of
saying, yeah,
stress
yeah.
that being low
Yep.
socioeconomic creates
But
on the
that's
body.
the question. It's that, so, but what is it that is encoded into the cells in your bone marrow that
Right.
makes them less? That has decreased longevity. That's going to be a change to telomeres. That's going to be epigenetic markers. That's going to be probably certain amounts of I don't know what's happening in the mitochondria, like what kind of inflammation.
Yeah, are the cell walls not as good? Like, what's going on?
So cell walls only in plants, not in mammalian cells.
Well,
so
yeah,
just
not
membranes,
cell walls, the
membranes.
biolipid membrane.
Yeah. But who knows? Yeah,
That's what I meant.
Yeah, what's going on there? It just how does it get encoded, and why does it matter? And if that's the way it is, what can we fix? We're not going to, but what can we? And yeah. Well, let's talk about some really good news. Justin, do you have this just in with your good news?
This just in. Good news. There is a cooling power on the planet that is reflecting the heat and cooling the planet. This is actually pretty. I mean, I think we may have this is not the news part of this. The Arctic is an area that collects a lot of ice.
Oh, and not the Antarctic. The Arctic. Got it.
Arctic and Antarctic.
With bears.
Both of the
Without
Arctic
bears.
regions.
Yeah.
The one with the bears and the one with the penguins.
Yes. Oh gosh.
As sea ice disappears and grows less refractive, it loses its cooling power. So, how much cooling power have we lost? According to this study, the Arctic has lost around a quarter of its cooling power since 1980, and the world at large has lost up to 15%, according to new research by the University of Michigan scientists. Using satellite measurements of cloud cover and solar radiation reflected by sea ice between 1980 all the way up to 2023, the researchers found that the percentage decrease in sea ice's cooling power is about twice as high as the percentage decrease in annual average sea ice area in both the Arctic and Antarctic.
So it's
What do you-
kind of like they're
Got it.
proportional or related.
They say the added warming impact from this
Mhm.
change to sea ice cooling power is toward the higher end of climate model estimates. Meaning, we had like the IPCs like, oh, maybe 1.5% to 2%, that would be the goal. And then some were like, oh, actually, it's going to be more like 3 or 4% by the end of the. Yeah, the higher end is, we're talking about a few meters of sea change to tens of meters of sea level change. Like it's the bad stuff that we've. Whenever you've heard like the worst case scenario, whenever we've talked about climate change, what can happen? This is showing that, yeah, it's going to be more like that in terms of how things are heating up. So the Arctic has seen the largest and most steady declines in sea ice cooling power since the 1980s. But until recently, actually, the South Pole, the Antarctic, had appeared more resilient to the changing climate. The sea ice cover had remained relatively stable from 2000 into the 2010s, and the cooling power of Antarctic sea ice was actually kind of trending up a little bit, which kind of makes sense. If one side is losing ice, there's more moisture in the atmosphere. If the South Pole is still colder, then it could turn into ice, right? You just grab it and use it. This abruptly changed in 2016 when an area larger than Texas. And if you don't know anything about the size of Texas,
It's
Texas is big.
Yeah.
When an area larger
Takes
than
days
Texas
to drive across.
melted on one of the continent's largest ice shelves in 2016, then it lost sea ice, and its cooling power has not recovered, according to the study.
It just put us at a new baseline.
Yeah, it just dropped it. It was like, gone.
I can see that.
So the changes to Antarctic sea ice since 2016 boost the warming feedback from sea ice lost by 40%. Not counting for this change in radiative effect of sea ice in Antarctica, we could be missing considerable part of the total global energy absorption, says Alisher Duspeyev, doctoral student physics, study's first author. Research team hopes to provide their updated estimates of sea ice's cooling power and climate feedback from less reflective ice to the climate science community via a website that is updated whenever new satellite data is available.
So this is ongoing, which is great. It's not the end of the research. It's not like, oh, hey, we're all done now. No, this is a continuous process. This is observational. We're trying to collect all the data to see if the trends change at all, but it's not looking great. How can we, I don't know, how many ice makers will it take to put the ice back?
If you're in America, one vote. It's the best thing you can do. We're coming up on an election. Vote for politicians and policies that believe in and support climate action.
Yeah. Not just climate action, but environmental sustainability. Climate action specifically, but environmental sustainability.
Or put the United States into the business of ignoring or actively attacking climate science for the next 4 years. See how that
those
rolls.
are your choices.
See how that goes.
Yeah, how that rolls.
I don't know. My ice cream's melting.
There are some things that are self-correcting. I think with the sea level rise and increased hurricanes and all that sort of stuff, we're likely to be without Florida and Texas soon, but maybe not soon enough to save them.
One of the big good aspects of this, though, is that with less ice, what that means is that our days are changing because the Earth has less, the mass is different. And so the the impact of, or the distribution of the mass is different, actually. So according to a study that is out in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences this week related to what you're talking about with the ice, polar ice melt is changing the speed of the Earth's rotation and increasing the length of each day. So we all have more time to work.
How much more time? Oh no, to work.
Yeah.
You're right.
But it's a matter of milliseconds a day, not long periods of time. Over
See,
time,
that
it will
adds
add
up.
up. Yeah, over time, it will add up. But in the general frame of your whole day, it's not making that big of a change. But what's going to be impacted are the GPS systems that are navigation and computing systems kind of rely.
What about like,
So is
are we
this-
gonna need another leap day every once in a while?
Maybe. I mean, if the days, if things, day length changes enough,
Was
then
it-
yeah.
This is
That's what-
because of the loss of ice and mass at the poles. Is this what this is saying?
Yeah. Yes.
So this
Because
is like-
it's a change in the distribution of the mass.
It ends up,
right?
This is
the
like-
Earth is not a circle, or it's not a perfect
Heart.
sphere. It's like fat
Heart.
in the middle, and so
Yeah.
as ice
Oblate
melts, it gets
spheroid. It's one of
fatter
my
in the
favorite
middle.
words.
Yeah,
Oblate
it's like
spheroid,
the
yeah.
opposite of like when you when somebody spins, but they're spinning like an ice skater spinning. They put their arms out, they slow down,
Mhm.
right? Because
Mhm.
but this is the opposite. This is like spinning but scrunching. That like I'm trying to figure out like how to.
No, the length. So the length of the day is increasing, which means that the Earth is slowing down.
Okay.
So it would be
Well-
moving from the top, the top and the bottom. It's going. The Earth is like slowly putting the water toward the middle because it's going into more water vapor and more liquid water in
It's
the
like
oceans
sticking its
as
arms
opposed
out a
to.
little bit.
Yes,
to slow down.
exactly.
Okay.
It's exactly like that. Mhm. Just a little, though. I mean, it's like as if our Earth had little tiny T-Rex arms. Ballerina TX arms.
So I hate
You
to be a party pooper. I have to do some training.
Don't be late
No,
for
I
your
got
very
really
important date.
Training regimen today. So I gotta
As
go
long as
train.
it's not the poop train.
Why am I going on that one too?
Chugga, 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 chugga. Poo,
What?
poo.
I'll see you guys. See you
Chugga,
next
chugga,
week.
Chugga, chugga. Poo, poo. I'll see you next week. Let me leave you with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh, I am just high class all the time. That's all. Oh my goodness. People don't invite me fancy places. I should totally get more invitations to fancy places. Anyway. My last story for the first part of the show, especially now that Justin's gone. I kept this secret for so long. Now, we've studied a lot about the effects of microplastics, nanoplastics on biology, and a lot of questions have arisen, even as we have seen evidence that, yeah, a turtle can eat the plastics and it's going to mess up their gut. There's stuff that ends up in the bloodstream. There's plastics in guy testes. There's plastics in placentas, all sorts. What are they doing? There's evidence that some of these plastics influence hormones, have estrogenic effects, all sorts of other. But what are they really doing? Researchers at the University
Gumming
of
stuff
Texas.
up, right?
Oh gosh. Well, this is a big one actually. The University of Texas El Paso just looked into how nanoplastics and per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, the PFASs, forever chemicals, actually disrupt molecules, proteins, and their functions. And so one of the things they were looking at were the PFAS molecules and other nanoplastics and their influence on milk proteins, the beta lactoglobulins, and how they get produced in the mammary tissue. And in two studies that were published this last week, Journal of American Chemical Society and ACS Applied Materials and Interfaces, these researchers, the three proteins, beta-lactoglobulin, alpha-lactalbumin, and myoglobin, it's in our muscles, Myoglobin is in lots of muscles. It helps us breathe. It helps us chugga, 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 poo, poo. Anyway, I'm never going to, I need to go home. I am home. Oh, go home, Kiki. I just don't want to say this news because it's good that we know about it, but at the same time, it's really disturbing. What they determined is that these microplastics actually, by way of van der Waal forces and other electrostatic forces at the level of very like subatomic interactions, these microplastics create binding sites in these proteins, the 3 that they looked at, and end up basically dissolving the proteins from their folded alpha shape to beta sheets. So they pretty much protease. They break down the proteins so that the proteins are not able to protein anymore. They're not able to do what they're.
It's like you scrambled your eggs.
Yeah. So what happens when you're scrambling your eggs? When the albumin, the whites are turning white, that means that they're getting heated up and all the folded albumin proteins are opening up. And you see the color change because suddenly they are reflecting light in a different way or refracting light in a different way. But, in essence, what's happening is the denaturation, right? That those proteins are breaking down into their flat sheet conformations and not the state that could be functional anymore. And that's kind of what happens with these microplastics. The microplastics bust them out. So for breast milk, it leads to less nutritious breast milk. So you are not getting the nutrition or the proteins that are necessary for a developing child in the form that the child's digestive system is expecting it. And then secondarily, the child is also getting the microplastics, which are then potentially going to interact further with their own proteins if they're not broken down further. And then the myoglobin, as it's broken down, that can lead to, in their tests, they looked at C. elegans, so little worms, right? But the worms, they stopped doing the wormy dance. They stopped moving around and dancing. They didn't like to move anymore. So for our muscles and our respiration, for all sorts of things, it could be a reason that some individuals are short of breath or have muscle dysfunction. We don't know this for sure, but that's what they found in their tests. So still more links to be made specifically. And this was definitely in a dish. It was not in people. They didn't go on and give the microplastic breast milk to babies. They're not going to go do that.
Good.
Yeah. The C. elegans, the proteins didn't fare well, and the C. elegans did not do well either. So, hey, this is some really good evidence that those plastics were putting into the environment. The PFASs specifically, not just that they're bad, but how they're bad and where they could be really impacting us and the environment we exist within. PFAS is bad, okay? So it's all those little plastics, just all of them. Just good. Don't denature your breast milk. No. Yeah. Get away from the plastic, Blair. Just step away from the plastic.
It's everywhere.
It is everywhere. It's so hard. Okay, I'm going to take a very, very quick break for a moment to say to you all, this is This Week in Science. Thank you very much for joining us for another episode. I hope you're enjoying all this really bad news. I'm really good at avoidance. So I hope that you like going down rabbit holes with me and with Blair and with Justin each and every week as we explore all sorts of things. Because, if one rabbit hole is disturbing, you can just find a new one with TWIS. So share rabbit holes into the science world and curiosity with all your friends, your family, workmates, everyone you know. Get them to subscribe to TWIS as well. That would help us a lot. Also, head over to twist.org, click on our Patreon link, and you too can help support the show on a monthly, ongoing fashion, $10 and more per month, and we will thank you by name at the end of the show. Click on the Zazzle link, and you can help us by buying some of the cool merch that we've got. We've got hats and shirts and mouse pads and all sorts of things. Just don't buy plastic stuff. I don't know. Plastic's bad, okay? And anyway, we cannot do the show without your support. We love the fact that you're here, that you're listening, that you're watching. Thank you for being a part of TWIS. Thank you for your support. We can't do it without you. All right, everybody, it's time to come back once again for that lovely part of the show that is uplifting and fantastic. It's the animal world. It's Blair's Animal Corner with Blair.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. If you want to hear about animals, she's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
Hey, Blair, what you yawn?
Hey, so it's July 17th. It is officially the end of a 2-day online shopping spree that I shall not name. And so I have taken this opportunity to remind you, please don't buy any bats on online retailers. That is a thing.
Wait, what?
Do
they? I mean, if I
Yes.
look on the online retailer that is probably finishing that thing, am I going to
Yes.
find bats?
Search bat decor or
Oh,
real bat decor or preserved bat decor, and you will
Really?
find a lot of things. This is a study from University of California, Davis and City University of New York, Queens College. And this is the first comprehensive study of the ornamental trade in a bat species that is done in conjunction with the International Union of the Conservation of Nature's Bat Trade Working Group, so the IUCN's Bat Trade Group. They were specifically looking at Caravula picta, or the painted woolly bat, being sold on Etsy, eBay, Amazon, and other online retailers as jewelry, Halloween decoration, or jarred curios. They're about a finger-sized bat. They're orange and black. They're quite striking. And so they are commonly preserved and sold as decor. They used data mining and manual data collection to analyze and quantify the online bat trade across US-based online retailers that I previously mentioned. I'm not trying to give them ads over and over during this segment. And this is specifically during the 2022 Halloween, and Christmas seasons. I'm assuming some people are opening up presents for the winter holidays of bat curios.
Mhm.
Of the 856 bats that were identified online, so they found almost 900 listings just between Halloween and Christmas on these sites. 215 of them were this specific woolly bat, representing 284 individuals. So that means some of these postings had multiple bats in them. Like, I don't know if they had some creepy headdress or maybe a couple bats in a case. I don't know. But so some of them doubled up. So in the end, they had 284 individuals via these 856 listings. They were from 30 states. In Tennessee, they had the most of any state. Keep in mind, this bat species is not from the United States.
Right.
Tennessee alone counted for 45% of these listings of the woolly bats. It was followed by Illinois, California, and Florida together, which made up 27%, with all three of them lumped together. And so they found these nearly 300 individuals over a 3-month period. That doesn't include other websites and physical shops that you might go to. So this is just kind of a snapshot at these large retailers. And what's really interesting is that about 20% of the listings use sales language that were supposed to make it sound okay. So they used ethical or
Right.
sustainable in their language of the listing. Several claimed the bats were bred in captivity. No.
Oh,
Several of them claimed they died of natural causes or were not harmed. If that were the case, they would not be very pretty. So the fact that they looked perfect means they were caught healthy and then dispatched
oh
in a
gosh.
way that would not impact the item, right? And
Yeah.
so
Man.
any claim of sustainable sourcing or anything like that, the authors just completely reject. There's no way that that makes any sense. And so this study suggests that the specific wording is supposed to ease buyers' environmental and social concerns, misleading them to a sale where, like, maybe they're a science enthusiast and they like kind of science-based curios and they think that that's, they're building a wall like Kiki's pharmaceutical and scale and stuff walls behind. Like, I could
Mhm.
totally see a universe where I'd be like, here's my pinned moth and here's my pinned bat. It totally makes sense. So it's not surprising to me that these are popular items, even particularly with science enthusiasts or animal enthusiasts. I could see this happening. And so this kind of mislabeling is really detrimental. The other issue here is that woolly bats live about 10 years and they only have one offspring at a time. And so
Oh
when
my
you take an
gosh.
animal like that, so this is like the
That is
same reason that
unusual. That's unusual for
shark predation is such a
yeah.
big deal. If you're hunting sharks or if you're making shark fin soup or if you're culling sharks, like the big impact there is that they have babies very late in life. They live very long time, and they have them in small quantities. And so just like that with the bats, that means that every bat you take out of the wild, that were they able to ever reproduce before you did that? If not, you're taking an entire kind of proliferation source of a species away. And so that has a really large impact on the population beyond the individual that was removed from the wild. It's every baby and grandbaby and great grandbaby and great great grandbaby that could come from that family line that you have now removed from the wild, right? So it's a pretty large conservation impact when you have wildlife trafficking like that. So
Yes. Yeah,
from
that
this
kind of a
study,
species for sure. Yeah. Right.
yeah.
It's just
Um,
it's huge.
Yeah. And so their recommendation is that there's some sort of formal legal protection for K. picta. So they want to include it into CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which would prohibit the international trade. It's surprising to me that bats aren't on that list already, kind of as a whole.
Considering health concerns and
Health concerns, the fact that they're vectors, but also just the fact that pretty much all bats
preservation.
are endangered.
Not all
I
of
would
them.
have to, not all of
No.
them, but most of
No.
them, I would say. And that is the other piece that they want. They want a legal petition to put the woolly bats on the Endangered Species Act. So bats are impacted for a bunch of reasons. You're going to be hard pressed to find bat populations that aren't declining for a bunch of reasons. And so this is a pretty interesting case where, it could be because they're kind of like stigmatized because they're creepy or whatever, that people put them in this kind of curio category that's different. But I just kind of wanted to throw out there, buyer beware, when you see a quote unquote sustainably sourced taxidermied animal, be suspicious.
I mean, it's know where you're buying things from as
Mhm.
well. If you know a particular store or source is above board, then it's great. And there are some that really are, but it puts the onus on the consumer in this case because there's a lack of regulation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
see that Fada in the chat room says it sounds like the cane toad items in Australia. That's actually quite different. So I wanted to just mention that the cane toads are invasive species. Their population has exploded. They need to be eradicated. They are pressuring out all of the native fauna, which is why Australians have kind of taken a tongue-in-cheek method in some ways to reducing the cane toad population, and they have started using them as fashion items. So
And I do have
it's
to
very different.
And I do have to recommend this incredible cane toad documentary from, I think it's like the 70s or 80s, that a friend, Matt Shipman, who's a science writer in North Carolina, he and his wife, his family turned me on to it. And it is one of the most brilliant pieces of nature documentary I have ever seen in my life. It's like Monty Python and a nature documentary made a baby.
Oh my goodness.
It's amazing.
Wow, you'll have to share that. I would love to see it.
It's so good.
I used to work with cane toads at the zoo, so it's very funny.
But yeah, okay.
And
so for Halloween, do not go online and get a real preserved bat hair net.
Might I suggest one made out of felt? They exist on Etsy and they're very cool.
Felted things are so adorable. I love felted stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so from bats to seagulls,
very different. They both fly.
About seagull dietary choice. When we think about seagulls, I know what I think about, and it is a seagull dive bombing me and stealing my French fries when I was a child at the zoo. So we think about seagulls and we think about them stealing human food. If you were
trying
given
to eat my toe,
seagull of Kiki's toe or French fries or a herring, what do you think they'd prefer? Probably
whatever is there.
No.
Well, yeah,
maybe
my
the
toe.
French fries.
Whatever's there.
Well, it turns out the study says they want the seafood. And so, Kiki, you're absolutely right. It's about what's there. So they took some seagull chicks that were raised in captivity. They were actually rescues after falling off roofs in the UK. These are herring gull chicks. So they rescued these seagull chicks that were otherwise probably not going to survive. They raised them in the lab, and then they tested them on these different diet choices. They were given either a marine diet consisting mainly of fish and mussels or an urban diet containing mostly bread and cat food. Every few days, they were presented with the choice of all 4 foods in different bowls. They had, they had fish, mussels, bread, and cat food.
And then they move the position of the bowls around, like,
I assume. I didn't get super deep into the methods here, but that would be my assumption, is that they tried to control some variables. But they all strongly favored fish, no matter what they were raised on.
I'm watching this video of this baby seagull who's very cute. Went up first and ate the food that was close, and now is like tripping over some other food. I don't know. It's like, I could care less about this, and is going straight for the fish. It's like, I'm going to step on this food to get to the better stuff. It's very adorable.
Just fish. Yeah. So they, the research.
I'm sorry. I thought I was sharing and I wasn't.
Oh no, you weren't.
No,
the reason that we associate seagulls with human food is exactly what Kiki mentioned: availability. So the human associated foods are reliably present. They're easy to obtain. They don't have to fight anybody for it. They just steal it out of the dumb kid's hand, like me. So it's easy to grab.
Exactly.
And so that is why we see them dumpster diving and eating human food as much as they do, is just because it's present. Now, where this gets really interesting, I think, is that they combined this research with what was learned from previous research showing that parent seagulls switch to finding more seafood once their chicks hatch. So the idea there is they're going for whatever's easiest while they're sitting on the nest. They don't want to be gone too long, whatever it is. They don't need that much energy. I don't know, but they're just eating whatever's easiest while they're incubating. Once the chicks hatch, they pop to the seafood diet as much as possible. So the theory is that has to do with the seafood providing more nutrients that the chicks need, so that when they're regurgitating and they're feeding the chicks, it is the best possible food source for them. And so in this study, they had 27 chicks. Yeah.
I was going to say, in terms of the incubation period, that's not giving nutrients to the babies, because it's just the adults sitting on the nest, just taking care of the nest and it's just like
keep it warm.
Just keeping it warm. I just need to keep myself alive. basically what it is, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't want to be gone too long so that I can relieve my partner who is sitting on the nest. So we make sure that those eggs don't get too cold. So they had these kind of presentations of the food at different intervals throughout their lives, and time again, the seafood was the choice. And so the reason I bring this up is just because of our perception of seagulls, and that just because they are eating human food, that doesn't mean that that is actually their preference. And so that also means that if you remove the human food from the equation, perhaps if you have some trash cans that close better, if you don't feed the gulls as some people do intentionally, then they might actually find themselves getting pushed to do the harder thing that is better for them nutritionally. So this is
Eating
one
plastic.
of the other reasons that we don't feed wildlife. They might look like they're enjoying it, but they would be better off foraging for the food that they should be eating. And in this case, they'd rather have that. So.
I mean, this is what I'm going to say to Kai's grandparents when they take him for, next summer. I'll say, don't let him eat whatever out of the garbage cans. Just make him work for it.
Make him forage for food. We're freegan now. Mom, Dad, accept my freegan lifestyle, okay?
Freegan. Is that a new word?
Anyway. That just, I mean, you're a human forager is what that means.
But it's the same thing. It's like whatever is convenient, and we call convenience stores for a reason. What is convenient is not necessarily good for you. It'll keep you alive, but it is not something that is really necessarily going to be nutritiously beneficial.
Right.
I mean, unless, of course,
that's what we used to say about like fast food, right? Is that if you live in like a food desert and you don't have a good sized income, then fast food might be the best thing that you can provide you for your family, but it is not as nutrient rich. Of course, now there's been a recent socioeconomic study saying that fast food is now considered a luxury expense in a lot of communities. So I don't know what people are eating who are lower income now. So I need to get off this again. I'm going to get really upset again.
We need to get off the internet generally. No, people just need to listen to our podcast. Yeah. Let's not talk about the fast foods. Maybe we can create a world where we're not giving the animals the fast foods.
Yes, that would be
as great. Well as ourselves. Oh, Identity 4 says he's mostly a breatharian, cheating once or twice a day, though. Very good. I have a couple of stories. I'm going to tack onto this, and I'm going to jump to my last story, actually, that I thought would be a fun conversation, because it kind of ties into this idea of, how we impact the animals in the environment around us. And there's a study in Cell, one of the Cell journals this week, 50 Trends in Ecology and Evolution. And the paper is Co-Cultures, Exploring Interspecies Culture Among Humans and Other Animals. And the idea that they introduce is this concept of co-culture, that as humans of different cultures exist with each other on the planet, so do animals of different species. And animals of different species aren't just worried about each other in terms of, is that one going to eat me? Or can I take advantage? Or what can I do to make sure to hide from this one? Or what can I do to take advantage of whatever this other animal is doing? That it's not always totally selfish, that there are examples of cooperation and working together to a certain degree between some species on the planet, which I think is very fascinating. And the ideas that come out of this is that there are interactions between and within species that share common spaces. So in an ecosystem, it's not just that these animals fly past each other in the night. It's that they're actually existing together, like in a neighborhood, right? It's like all the people in the these are the people in my neighborhood, except they're not people. They're animals, and they all know each other. and some of them are friends and some of them aren't, but they're not ignoring each other or living in their own little bubbles. And animals exhibit cultural behaviors. And because they have these cultural behaviors and many times are social and aware of their and interacting within their environment, they can influence and learn from each other, not just their own kind, but other species as well. And so this concept is that two populations of different species, maybe more than two, can influence each other's cultures through synchronized activities. And that because of this, we really should think more about our impact on urban spaces. And they suggest testing this idea specifically in urban environments because of the fact that we change our urban environments so often, and that there's the possibility of really being able to take a good look at the reactions of different species within that space, especially the ones that are very common, like pigeons, rats, hawks, etc., the ones that we know very regularly. But anyway, I thought that would be something of interest to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a particular surprise.
Well, I mean, they have examples of it. This is simply it's an idea. And so they're putting forward this trend kind of as like, hey, everybody, nobody's talking about this. We talk about our food webs and how everybody eats everybody else, or, the behaviors that are, natural selection. It's only about mating and survival. But what about culture, right? It's not just human culture. There is animal culture. And I think that is something that's really fascinating to consider moving forward.
Yeah. No species lives in a vacuum. They're going to influence each other. We know lots of ways that species interact aside from predation, where there's parasitism, there's altruism, there's symbiotic relationships, there's all these things. But yes, it would make sense that there would be a culture level exchange if so many species survival is intertwined in a space, I think.
Yeah. And some of the examples that they give are things like cooperation in hunting between wild cetaceans and bottlenose dolphins, scavenging that's cooperative with ravens and wolves, also signal sharing between different species of tamarin. So there's probably more examples than this, but because we impact our environment so strongly, and there's so many animals that are existing in and around those environments, that might be a really ripe place for investigation.
Yeah, I mean, it's another case where we probably feel like we've seen this happen with humans and other animals, and we assume that we're special. The vultures know to follow my pickup truck because I always go and I pick up carrion or whatever, right? Or the hippos use truck tread to as pre-paved pathways at night, right? Or something like that. So like we'll say like, okay, these animals are interacting with humans. Isn't that cool? So humans are just another species of animal. And so if these wild animals are benefiting from us in a space, of course, there's going to be interaction between other species.
Now, the big question, though, is because you have these interactions on individual levels and maybe population levels, if there are repeated interactions that influence behavior and are learned, that change culture over time, could those behaviors over generations actually lead to changes at the genetic level that become adaptations that are carried on, and not just generationally or individually learned, but actually something that changes animals' populations moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Got to think about all the things together. The individuals, the cultures, the populations. all the things. Okay, if you want to do studies looking at how the brain works, you should submit them like you would if you were in astrophysics to a giant telescope observatory. In neuroscience, the Allen Institute now has the Open Scope Observatory. It's been around for about 6 years, but very similarly to observatories that look at the sky, the Allen Institute Open Scope Observatory looks at the brain and is this research, all of the research is it allows neuroscientists around the world to propose and direct experiments that the Allen Institute does. All the research is made available to anyone tackling open questions on neural activity in health and disease. This year, there are some fun ones looking at how magic mushrooms or psilocybin change brain activity at the cellular level. Another one at how the past changes our worldview in very subtle ways. How does that happen? They're also going to be looking at how the brain perceives motion, because that's always very interesting. And also how we are able to recognize patterns around us. How do we recognize the grain of wood? How does taking mushrooms influence our ability to recognize patterns in the grain of wood? They become much more interesting, that is for sure. So that is a really fun thing. And yes, this is a little bit of a PR push for the Allen Institute and this observatory, but I am very celebratory of research efforts that try to open up science and also allow more collaborative question asking, saying the Allen Institute, they've been able to build this giant brain model and they have this amazing resource. And then they're like, do you want to do stuff? Propose ideas and let's do it together. Let's all do it together.
That's excellent.
Yeah. Let's investigate us together. Additionally, psilocybin research study just published in Nature this week. In case you didn't know, it messes up your brain. No, it doesn't mess up your brain.
Temporarily. Right?
Temporarily. It's a psychedelic, a hallucinogen. It causes distortions of space-time perception and ego disillusion, or as some people love to call it, ego death. You have no ego. Who are you if you have no ego? Causes so many big questions in people's lives. Psilocybin has also been suggested to be very helpful also in cases of anxiety, depression, and it's a big question how brain networks change under the influence of these psychedelics, how the psychedelics have their impact, and what exactly is happening. This research study that was published, they found that psilocybin, it's kind of like if you were trying to count music, you're playing your saxophone, Blair, you're like, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Oh,
you're playing your music.
Okay.
You got your little waltz beat. You're going, and then someone's like, clapping or counting on the wrong beats, and maybe they're like in 5/8 time, or
yeah. Oh my gosh.
And suddenly you cannot keep your beat anymore. You are unsynchronized. That is what psilocybin does to your brain. Psilocybin makes it so that your synchronized nervous signals, the networks that are all working together in their synchronous activation, they're like, one of the things is doing its own thing, and suddenly it's like, and there you are with no ego.
I'm good.
You like my scientific explanation?
Yeah, it's excellent, and I have no interest in ever doing mushrooms. It's like my nightmare. Hey, let me take any order in your brain and destroy it.
Nope, no order.
How's that?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah, they found with healthy adults, they gave them a high dose of psilocybin, 25 milligrams. And they also gave a control of methylphenidate, 40 milligrams, and then brought them back for an additional dose 6 to 12 months later. Functional connectivity in the cortex and subcortex. These are the areas of the brain that help us keep track of things and be conscious and cognizant of stuff that's going on. Top-down control comes from the cortex. that was acutely the more than threefold. The psilocybin caused more than threefold greater change than the methylphenidate, and this was driven by desynchronization across spatial scales, so the global aspect of the brain. Dissolved networked distinctions. It reduced correlations between networks. And they were strongest in the default mode network, which is, what was that?
This is lasting effects beyond just what you're feeling when you're on the stuff. Later, they look at your brain and go, oh, this is forever changed.
Not forever, but for a while. It's different.
That state. So what I'm hearing is musicians should not take mushrooms before they go on stage.
Before you might make playing your instrument more difficult. Although I would love to see that experiment. What's your hypothesis? Let's test it, Blair.
Oh no.
Yeah. So anyway, yes, perception is the changes in perception are driven by massive changes in just the basic way your brain connects and how you are able to shunt information from one place in the brain to another. But this also gives us some really interesting insight into consciousness and how the cortex and subcortex are involved in our experience of the world. It might give us some insight into how individuals who have differences in their brain anatomy, who have had damage to their brains, why they may experience things in a particular way. It could also give us insight into how other species experience the world if they have a lack of cohesiveness between different areas in the brain. So our brain, it needs to be synchronized. It's all about the timing, everyone. Time and space, meet your place. It's a way to make it days. Yes. Functional connectivity within the brain decreased thanks to psilocybin, but it could also help you become less depressed if that's something that is good. And so I think another big question is, if this is the impact of psilocybin generally, why does it have anti-anxiety and antidepressive effects? How does it disrupt the network effects that have already driven plasticity and brain connectivity into a depressive state? How does it change that? So I think that's also going to be a very interesting question moving forward about how those changes take place. I think that's most fascinating. I have so many questions about the brain, about all the things. Don't you? No?
Always.
Always. Yeah. Okay. Last story about consciousness, because Blair has almost lost hers. We are getting to the end of the show here and the end of our time together tonight. Researchers suggest that based on their study that they have, it's a review of over 1,000 articles, identified over 20 different theoretical accounts. They've published this in Inter Alia. It's not peer-reviewed, so I'm just going to put that out there right now. But these researchers suggest that consciousness, our ability to be self-aware, that it did not arose? No, I can't speak anymore. It didn't arise from our individuality. It arose from our sociality. And the fact that we're social is what led to us having a need for consciousness and for that evolution.
That makes sense, right? Because you don't really need a sense of self. You need a sense of other. You need a sense of them versus self. You need an awareness that the people around you are distinct from you. So for communication, it's not just so you're yelling into the void. It is broadcasting information, right? Why broadcast information? It's to others. And if you're broadcasting it to others, you also want to be able to understand
your place in that system, and then any information that might come back. So information transfer requires understanding of self from other.
Yeah, and I also think about like self-awareness from the perspective of being aware of where your body is in space and how it impacts other people, but also self-awareness has to do with like how what you do impacts people emotionally, logistically. And so it really, so much of self-awareness is actually about how you impact the people around you that you wouldn't really need it if you were only worried about, if you were solo, you don't really need to be self-aware because you're just doing like pure id, basically. You're doing exactly
now we're doing the ego versus id.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're back to it. We were talking about it with the mushrooms and now we're back. But it does feel like
mushrooms.
You really, you can be pure impulse if you're not worried about anybody else around, if you're all by yourself. You protect yourself, you nourish yourself, you do what yourself needs. You don't need to think about how, oh, I need this piece of bread, but this is the last piece of bread and somebody else is reaching for the bread. And so part of being self-aware is recognizing that I need this, but they also need that. And maybe we should share it. It's like, yeah.
That it's not self-intuition that's necessarily the important aspect of consciousness, but it does accommodate the social purpose of what consciousness probably is. So what we're talking about, volition and agency related to others. So anyway, I thought that was a very interesting idea. Yes, it is not peer-reviewed, but it is an interesting concept. So we think of consciousness as ourselves, but maybe it's about us all. I am Ego Death, and this is the end of our show. Have we done it, Blair?
We've done it. Let's do some shout outs.
I think it's time for some shout outs. Absolutely. All right, Blair, you're Justin tonight, okay?
Yes, you got it.
Yeah, all right. Everyone out there, thank you for joining us once again for another episode of This Week in Science. We hope you enjoyed the show. Getting deep here at the end. And shout outs tonight. Fada, thank you so much for helping with show notes and social media. Identity 4, thank you for recording the show. Gord, Arnlore, others, thank you so much for your help keeping the chat rooms good places to be. All you chatters who are there in the chat room all the time that we're streaming this show, thank you for being here watching the show live and talking with us while we talk about science. And Rachel, thank you so much for not recording. Identity 4 does that, for editing the show. Really appreciate all your help. So much, though, we do appreciate our Patreon sponsors. So I need to say thank you to Eden Mundell, Alan Viola, Aaron Anathema, Craig Potts, Mary Gertz, Teresa Smith, Richard Badge, Bob Coles, Kent Northcote, George Chorus, Pierre Velazar, John Ratnaswamy, Chris Wozniak, Vegard Shefstad, Donathan Styles, a.k.a. Don Stylo, Ali Coffin, Shoe Brew, Regan, Sarah Forfar, Don Mundus, PIG, Stephen Alberon, Daryl Myshak, Andrew Swanson, Fred S104, Sky Luke, Paul Ronovich, Kevin Reardon, Noodles, Jack, Brian Carrington, David Youngblood, Sean Clarence Lamb, John McKee, Greg Riley, Mark Hessenfeld, Steve Leisman, a.k.a. Zima, Ken Hayes, Howard Tan, Christopher Rappin, Richard, Brendan Minish, Johnny Gridley, Remy Day, G. Britton Lattimore, Flying Out, Christopher Dreyer, Greg Briggs, John Atwood, Rudy Garcia, Dave Wilkinson, Rodney Lewis, Paul Phillips, Shane, Kurt Larson, Craig Landon, Sue Doster, Jason Olds, Dave Neighbor, Eric Knapp, Lawn Makes, EO, Adam Mishkon, Aaron Luthen, Bob Calder, Marjorie, Paul Disney, David Simlerly, Patrick Pecoraro, and Tony Steele. Thank you so much for all of your support on Patreon. And if anyone else out there would like to join us on Patreon and support us, help support the show, head over to twis.org and click on the Patreon link. On next week's show,
we will be back on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific
No,
time.
you won't.
Broadcasting. I won't. You will.
It's true.
Broadcasting live from Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook channels. Watch Kiki and Justin.
Thanks, Blair. If you want to listen to us as a podcast, oh, and by the way, thank you so much to Lauren Krieger for inviting me out to the Gordon Research Seminar this last weekend. She apparently has been listening to TWIS for a very long time and started her own podcast for a while as a result of what we were doing. So good to meet you. And thank you so much for joining us in the podcast world. If anyone else out there wants to listen to us as a podcast and then start their own podcast, you can look for This Week in Science wherever podcasts are found. And if you enjoyed the show, of course, start your own podcast. No, I mean, get your friends to subscribe too and listen to the podcast.
You do a listen along podcast with us.
No.
Listen to our podcast on your podcast. For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to stories will be available on our website. That's at www.twis.org. You can also sign up for our newsletter.
And we might actually do a newslettery thing one of these days. It would be
Who
great.
knows?
We know. We do love your feedback. And if there's a topic you would like us to cover, address, or a suggestion for an interview, you can let us know on one of those social media accounts. We might not look at it, but really you can send us an email. And Blair, I'm going to let you tell us why people need to put TWIS into the subject line.
So you got to put TWIS in the subject line, or your email will end up in a little boat of fries that is carried away by some seagulls off into the distance, gobbled down whole, and we will never read them.
No, never. Oh, no. Oh, my goodness.
We look forward to discussing science with you next week. And by we, I mean Kiki and Justin. And if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in 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 Science.